frameworks and theory, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity to start the conference talking a little bit about the history of cultural astronomy and what's happening, and some core theoretical frameworks within our discipline. So I'm going to be very excited to introduce Alejandro Martin Lopez from Argentina, who's going to come up and give our first academic talk.
Okay, good morning. My name is Alejandro Lopez. I'm from Argentina. I'm an astronomer and anthropologist. And the talk today is Astronomical Heritage, Cosmopolitics, Shamanism, and Hegemonic Modernity. I have the idea of talking about two things. For one hand, present a concrete case analyzing the experiences with a group of indigenous participants in a training program as guides in the provincial park of meteorites in Campo del Cielo, Argentina. But in the other hand, to talk about some important methodological and theoretical points: the change of mythical systems, the constructions of indigenous versions of modernity, and also the category of border things. Okay, the context of our case is the dispersion, the meteoritic dispersion of Campo del Cielo in Chaco province in Argentina. It's a very old meteoritic dispersion, 4,000 years ago, with many craters and many big metallic meteorites, and of course, a long cultural history. In the same region lives the Mocoit Aboriginal people. I'm working with the Mocoit Aboriginal people from 1988, and they are originally hunter and gatherers to the first part of the 20th century. The historical records claim that these people know about the meteorites long time ago, and also know that are things from the sky, and guide the Spaniards to some of these meteoritic fragments. In more recent times, some very big meteoritic fragments are unearthed. For example, the Chaco meteorite, that is the second largest in the world, and the Gancedo meteorite, that is the third largest in the world. Exist many different known indigenous interests in these meteorites. Exist religious cults, popular festivals, scientific studies, of course, and also smuggling. And these interests are focused mainly in the impact issue and also in the metallic nature of these objects. But for the Mocoit people, the interest is different. They know that these objects come from the sky, but they are more interested in the idea that are powerful beings of the sky present on Earth, connected with fertility, abundance, and power, and of course related to leadership, and for this reason have a very important political meaning. As the result of the increasing non-indigenous interest in these meteorites, start a process of national heritage that is underway today, with many conflicts with the interest of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And the Mocoit people make very strong claims for participation, first in the territory and the management of the territory, second in the message about the meteorites, and third in the economic benefits of the tourism. In this context, we start the training project for young Mocoit guides, Nawek Hataganak, that is still in work. In this process, elders from the Mocoit communities acting as trainers for the young guides. Also, Mocoit leaders act as a local coordinator of the group. We have a technical team. I am a coordinator of the technical team. And these are our guides. During the training stage, 2 years, they learn a lot about different things, but especially they have many two-day camps in the crater zone with the elders to learn about their own traditions. The elders share their knowledge about the animals and the food, the bush and the meteorites and the sky. The young guys getting to know the exhibition at the Park Interpretation Center, and design routes for the tourists into the bush, but also meeting with the elders at night. In these meetings, the elders share their stories about the sky, and the young people listen. This situation is similar to the traditional context of learning about the sky in Democoi communities. And they identify in the sky some of these non-human beings. You have here some of them. But also, and the most interesting for today is that during these situations, the young people also begin to share personal accounts of experiences with non-human beings, with deep emotional impact for them that include altered experiences of time and space, for example, and that are very amplified in the powerful space of this crater zone and also at night. And they consult the elders about the meaning of these experiences. And the morning, as is usual in Mocoit communities, the people talking about the night and the success, the things that happen at night. For example, how did you sleep last night? Did you have any kind of dreams? Did you notice any sounds of shapes moving outside at night? And during these experiences, the young people share the experiences during the night. You need to take into account that dreams are not for Mocoit people psychic experiences, but real dimensions of the universe. In this context, the dreams are interpreted to understand the meaning. And in many occasions, the young people talk about they interrupt their sleep because sounds and go outside the tent to research about the origin. And in some occasions, they encounter with powerful beings in the bush. To understand these situations, they use the mythical and traditional stories, but they use as living things, as past experiences of encounters with these kinds of things or beings in the past. And for this reason, in this context, emerge new forms of these mythical stories. In the same sense, every instruction session, including during the day, was more than the transmission of an ancient knowledge. It's also the reenactment of a real life knowledge about the sky, the world, the cosmos, and the relation among humans and non-human beings. And this implies itself an act of power and puts you in a vulnerability position to the intentions of these powerful beings. During the day, also, they go to the bush to understand about plants and animals, but these works imply precautions, requests for permission from the owners of the forest, and specific ways of behaving within the forest. To understand all of this, it's important to take into account modernity. But we need to think in modernity as, you know, an unfinished project that is also multiple and is reformulated in the local situation by the subalternized people, taking new forms and acting as a tactical form of reappropriation of this hegemonic modernity that is imposed to them. During the first supervised guides in the 2 years, 23, 24, the young Mocoit guides have many difficulties and problems to face. And beyond the technical difficulties of interacting for the first time with a non-Aboriginal audience, they have the difficulties of dealing simultaneously with non-human entities that are not real for the tourists, but are very real for them. At night, the tourists are more sensitive to these Mocoit experiences of the night sky. But even with the best intentions, misunderstandings or controlled equivocations arise between tourists and guides. One, for example, is for Mocoit people, the humanity is composed by men from Earth and women from the sky. And when women are in special powerful states, like for example, menstruating, and are close to special powerful places, like for example, the bush or lagoons, this is a very dangerous situation. In this situation, the Nanay Kalo, or mother of snakes, that smell these menstruating women, can unleash violent meteorological phenomena. During one of these practical guides, the information that a tourist is menstruating generated a lot of concern among the male and female guides. The subsequent storm that broke at night, this very night, generated an intense debate about how to manage these situations in the future. The Mocoy do not expect to have the only authoritative voice in this management of the meteorite, but they aspire to have almost one voice in this table. To think about in which manner these different ideas are integrated, we can think in the theoretical notion of border things. These are things around which certain human groups articulate in a physical way actions, with each one maintains a very different interpretation in the details. And all of this, of course, is in the context of difference of power. The meteorites of Campo del Cielo are functioning really as border things. A loose articulation of actions and meanings and a complex series of cosmopolitics disputes are simultaneously deployed around these meteorites. For example, exists a lax consensus about meteorites are things that are important and must be protected and are of interest to everyone, and that the Mocoid have a role because of the antiquity of their relation. But also exist cosmopolitic disputes. Are these things inert objects or are living entities? Who is the people that can speak about these meteorites? In which context? To which? To end, when a symbolic system is alive, this symbolic system changes. And this is always. And these symbolic systems of the Mocoid people and also the systems of the non-indigenous people in this context are living and changing. For this reason, it's very important for us to study the processes of change when we study the astronomical living traditions of today. The heritage management and also astrotourism initiatives that involve indigenous communities are not merely settings for the replication of an static and old tradition, but it's also the place for the generation of new ideas, of new applications of these old roots. This space for the production of new and compelling knowledge and practices relating to the sky should not be seen as degradation, but as new forms of these mythical roots. We also take into account that the encounters with non-human entities during both their training and guiding are crucial part for the Mocoit experience of this process. The interesting thing is in many occasions, the Mocoit people don't say a word to non-indigenous peoples about all of this. And this is part of this loose articulation of the border things that permits to these people to have some space to give their opinion. Meteorites and other forms of heritage act as boundary things around which genuine cosmopolitical disputes take place. And most of these debates occurs through the form of control equivocations, shaped by this loose articulation and differences in details. This dynamics allows less powerful actors to have a voice in this discussion without a very strong conflict with the other parts. And these processes play a key role in the construction of a very genuine alternative of hegemonic modernity. In this case, we can talk about a shamanic modernity. Thank you for your attention to this very short presentation.
Thanks, Alejandro. Perfectly on time. I love it. We've got time for a question. Does anybody in the audience have a question? I saw Ray your hand first.
right at the beginning, you're talking about the meteor shower.
Yeah.
Was the area inhabited at that time? And if so, there probably would have been a big event of supply. So are there any folk memories from songs and stories about that event?
You know, we don't know exactly because it's a very hard land to have archaeologists working. It's too hot and a lot of bush. And in these times, maybe it's covered by some kind of waters, no so deep, but we don't know if at that time exist people. But also, the Mocoit have stories about the descent of these celestial beings, but these are not the main concern of the Mocoit. They are very interested in the contemporary and actual situation of these objects, not in the past descent. Because for them, all the time are things and beings going up and going down from the sky. This is not a very spectacular issue, you know.
Yeah, lovely talk. Thanks very much. I noticed a picture of Bob Hague trying to remove one of those meteorites from the country. Is there now legislation to make sure that all meteorites are part of national heritage?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes. First of all, in Argentina, it's forbidden to take any of these pieces of Campo del Cielo. If you see some of these pieces online for sale, please don't buy it because it's illegal. And we have many of these pieces by sale in the shops of many museums, including Australia. This is a very bad thing, but happens all the time. And it's very important to understand that people come to the country with money and put money in very poor people to steal these objects. This is a very important issue, and it's a responsibility of all of us, of the international community, to not expand this, because it's very difficult to control.
You to retrain the people that are working with you in
No, it's my bad English, maybe. No. The issue is many of these kids are born in small communities and don't have contact with elders. And the program puts together elders for different communities and kids for different communities. And this make more strong boundaries with the past tradition.
Real quick, do we have an online question?
Yeah.
Can we read one out?
Do Mocoit people have a guidance to interpret the phenomenon in writing?
It's oral. It's an oral tradition, and this is very important because oral traditions have a dynamic that is very different from writing traditions. And it's more moving, and do you have many sub-traditions because people living in different places have different traditions in their communities. For this is very interesting when elders from different communities come together and discuss each other about things, and you can sit and listen very carefully because very important things are happening in that moment.
Thank you very much. Can we thank Alejandro? Okay, I'd now like to welcome Wayne Orchiston to come up and speak for us. Wayne is a long-term co-founder and editor of the Journal of Astronomical History and Heritage, among many things, and has quite a diverse educational background. So, Wayne, thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne, for the honor of being able to attend the conference and also for helping us get here. What I want to do is talk about a different area of history of astronomy that hopefully you'll find interesting. And let's just find, okay. The trouble is, okay. Yes, so what I want to do is talk about the way in which we're looking at the past and trying to use that to investigate changing astronomical systems. So I'll be giving some introductory comments just briefly, then talk about number 2, number 3, number 4, and finally some concluding remarks as shown here. I've got a cartoon there, which I always enjoy showing. This is a description of astronomy taken from a particularly canine interpretation, but I think we can all appreciate that. So we're talking about astronomy in this particular conference. We're talking about cultural astronomy. And when I was thinking about this paper, well, how can I start it? What's it all about? I realized actually it started here at this university, because more than 50 years ago, I was going to say 50,000, more than 50 years ago, I got my postdoc here. And I used to teach prehistory. I actually replaced John Mulvaney when he went to Canberra as professor of prehistory there. So I taught about human evolution, about prehistory, about environmental prehistory, that is, particularly in Bass Strait, and also geology. And I moved to the geology department after my postdoc was finished. And those were areas I did research on and I used to teach. And then I went into astronomy. And then 50 years later, during the 1990s, suddenly I'm back in astronomy thinking about why don't I actually exploit those areas I used to work in and relate those to astronomy. And so the obvious way is cultural astronomy. Being a Kiwi and being part Maori, it made sense to look at the Maori astronomy. So I started with that and then moved from there, as you can see on the map, to India and Southeast Asia and started doing what we call now multidisciplinary ethnoastronomy. It's a new area where what we try and do is combine data from different disciplines, so astronomy, anthropology, genetics, particularly mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes, geology, linguistics, paleoanthropology, which is human evolution, prehistory, and paleoclimatology. Combine all those and try and look at the way in which you can interpret astronomical systems from a chronological perspective, the way in which they would change over time. So the starting point for this is the idea that there's actually a direct correlation between prehistory and, between human evolution and astronomy. And we see that represented in many different examples from around the world, where there's a direct correlation between the nature of human ecology and astronomical systems. I could give many examples. Our previous speaker could give beautiful examples from South America, but I'm just going to give 2 here to explain this, and both relate to work that I'm either involved with or very familiar with. So the first relates to these people called the Padi from central India. When you have a look at them and look at their night sky, you find there's a direct correlation between important elements of their ecology, their diet, and the night sky. So we've got fieldwork that was carried out there. And what we find during the fieldwork is that there's a particular kind of net which is designed to catch these birds that you can see on the bottom left picture. And this net is transportable. It can be set up in the forest. The birds cluster in large numbers. They're very noisy. So you've got forewarning that you've got birds there and you can go and capture those birds. You can capture large numbers of birds. Each bird doesn't provide too much food, but if you've got 50 or 100 or several hundred birds, you've suddenly got an important contribution to the mainstay of the diet. And we find that the nest and also the techniques of bird collecting and capturing in the forest in India is represented in the night sky, not just with the actual representation of the birds, the Pleiades in this case, but also with the net. This particular kind of net is one of several different styles of net for catching different kinds of birds and animals. And this net is represented directly in the night sky adjacent to where you'll find those birds. So we've written a paper about this in the Journal of Astronomical History and Heritage, which documents the details. We're here in Australia, so it's obvious that I should be giving a second example which relates to Australia. And we've got the authors of the paper again published in JAHH. So Michael Anderson, Ray Norris, and Ray's here in the audience. Hand up, Ray. Okay. And Michelle Trudgett. And this relates to emus as dark lanes in the night sky. So we see that extending from the Coalsack to Ophiuchus. And we see this represented, for example, in the paper that they wrote amongst the Kamilaroi and the Ahuli tribes. And what we see with this is that the nature of the emu, the shape of the emu changes in the course of the year as the emu travels across the sky. And we can relate the change in shape and the timing of the emu with the availability either of eggs or of chicks. So if you go and have a look at A, B, C in this, and then look below on the bottom right, you can see the correlation is actually listed there. It's a very, very fascinating paper. There are other similar papers that Dwayne and others have published about other examples like this from Australia. So there's a wealth of material that you can read on this. And then, of course, we've got other examples from other parts of the world. Oh, sorry. I've got my long distance glasses so I can see you, but I can't see my screen when I'm trying to change slides, which is difficult. Okay, so my question is this. Well, when we go and do these studies, such as we've talked about, we're looking at the way in which there's a relationship between the night sky and human ecology at a particular point in time. So we're looking at an astronomical system, which through our studies is static. But astronomy is part of culture. And as we, as prehistorians know, culture evolves and changes, sometimes devolves through time. So we could expect that there would be changes taking place in astronomical systems through time amongst the same group of people. So let's just investigate, let's just investigate that concept. And what I want to do here is just identify some of the triggers that may lead to changes in astronomical systems, and then we'll go on and we'll have a look at a few examples of those. So one of the things, obviously, if you've got a major change in the environment, you're going to get changes in habitat. So you're going to get dietary changes. And you've got major things like sea levels changing. So in the diagram in the middle left, we've got an example there showing the way in which the sea level has varied over the last 125,000 years. So on the right-hand end of that scale is the present day. The thing that you see that's really important there is that the present day sea levels around the world have only been where they are now for the last 6,000 years. Prior to that, back until 125,000 years ago, the sea has always been lower than at present. And so the shores of any area, any country, any region of the Earth change markedly during that time. We can see an example of this by looking at the top right-hand picture, where we've got there the location of the shoreline at the time of the last interglacial sea level low, which is 125 meters below the present time. And this is about 18,000 years ago. And then from that period of about 20,000 years ago, the seas rose rapidly to reach the present level about 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago. And that sea level rise would have been actually visible to people on a generation to generation basis. You would see your habitat disappearing as the seas rose and drowned out your habitat where you were collecting food, or your seashore area where you're collecting particular kinds of fish or shellfish. So this would cause major changes. We've got major climatic changes which relate also directly to these changes in sea levels. We've got areas, particularly around the Ring of Fire that runs from Japan through to New Zealand, where you've got episodic volcanic eruptions, which would have made some areas particularly unsuitable for habitation for a long time. And then the other thing that's possible is that you can get a human population migrating or relocating to a new location that's never been occupied before. Suddenly they're faced with a totally new environment. How do they respond to that? And how do they have to change their original human ecology to adapt to this new environment? So those are the sort of things happening. We also get human populations moving from one location to another where there's already people living there. And if you've got, for example, hunter-gatherer people living in the location, and then you get relocation by people who've got horticulture, or they've got agriculture or pastoralism, so they're herding animals, there's going to be totally different astronomical systems introduced. What happens when you get the amalgamation of these cultures? You get the introduction later on, particularly in this Southeast Asian part of the world, of introduction of new religions, all of which have got their own astronomical systems. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, particularly relevant for the area that we're researching in Southeast Asia. And finally, again, we've got colonial astronomy. So we've got the British, Dutch, French, and Portuguese in Southeast Asia taking over areas which are now mostly independent. But when they were introduced, when these different colonial systems were introduced, they brought with them their own colonial astronomical systems. So we've got all of these sorts of changes. If we're looking at, say, the last 50 to 100,000 years, so the period when Australia is occupied, for example. So I want to just give a couple of examples to illustrate how this is relevant to what we're talking about today. And the first is to look at my own home country, New Zealand. So Nalani and Gareth, this is for you especially, and Dwayne, because he's also published on New Zealand ethnoastronomy. So when we had Europeans first arriving in New Zealand in 1769, they found a system of agriculture relating to the kumara, or the sweet potato, found throughout the country. Down as far south as the Christchurch, which is halfway down the east coast of the South Island of New Zealand. Below that, it was simply too cold for kumara to be grown. And this kumara cultivation was very well developed, and it also was closely interlinked with the Maori astronomical system, so that there are certain constellations or the certain asterisms in the night sky, which I show on the map there, numbered 1 to 5, which relate to specific aspects of Maori cultivation of kumara. So certain stars, the appearance of them will indicate time to clear the fields, then to plant the kumara. Then there's an indication again from astronomy of when to harvest the kumara. And then again, you've got a correlation between particular stars and when to carry out the different ceremonies before you then go through the cycle again the following year. So there's a lot of documentation on this, led mainly by Elsden Best, who is shown there on the picture at the top right, who was the ethnologist at the National Museum for quite some time. And he carried out a system of studies of a whole range of different cultural aspects of New Zealand. Okay, so what's the significance of that? How can we show change in this case? Well, it relates to the settlement of New Zealand and the fact that the people who came to New Zealand, the ancestral Maori, did not have kumara as their dietary staple. They came from the area of the Marquesas Islands, Southern Cooks, and they came to New Zealand between 1250 and 1280 AD. So we've got a very clear indication of when they arrived. There's a lot of archaeological evidence for this. And when they arrived in New Zealand, they brought with them a diet that was based on taro and yams. But they found New Zealand was far too cold to grow taro and yams in any kind of sustained way. They could grow taro and yams in small quantities in the northern part of the North Island in sheltered, warm environments. But it wasn't possible to use taro and yams as a dietary staple. So while they were busy hunting all of these giant birds, which we can see on the right, the moa, and familiarizing themselves with a totally alien environment, completely different from what they're used to in tropical Polynesia. So suddenly we've got a land with high mountains, with snow, we've got volcanoes all over the place. They're trying to work out what they can do in terms of providing a dietary staple, and they recognized that kumara was possible. It took a couple of 100 years for them to be able to adapt kumara growing because they couldn't just transfer it directly from their ancestral homeland. They had to overwinter the kumara tubers and then plant them again, whereas they just grow all year round in their homeland. So this not only involved developing a system like that, but also developing gardens which are in localized areas. And we can see this bottom left-hand diagram showing where there were particular stone alignments and ways of enriching the soil and able to grow kumara. And that kumara as a result then, good God, where'd that go to? Where are we?
You went back the other way. It's all right, we'll get there.
Yeah. No, I've just got 2 slides, so I'm finished anyway. How did I lose my?
Just gotta push the right button here. We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah, it was the one before.
Yeah.
So those are examples. Well, that's an example of changing astronomical systems. We've also got colleagues in both Philippines and in Indonesia who've been looking at the impact of religion, in this case Islam, on the changing astronomical systems in the Philippines and also in the island of Madura in Java. And we can see on the bottom right, for example, all of the different villages where Siti Fatima did field work as part of her PhD program. So this is ongoing work. Some of this has been published, some hasn't yet. And concluding remarks, where do we go to from here? Well, actually, had COVID not occurred, there would be other examples I could have given you. Instead, now we're just trying to gear up to do some of the kind of research that we would hope. So one of the areas I'm particularly interested in as a person who studied human evolution is to have a look at the way in which we've got different indigenous groups of people around the world, particularly in Southeast Asia. And on the left-hand map, we've got locations where what are called Negrito people, these are short people with a totally different morphology to the bulk of the population in those areas. And we can see examples of them on the right-hand side in the 3 pictures. And we find them in the Andaman Islands, and we find them in southern Thailand, in Malaysia, throughout central Malaysia, and then on a whole range of different locations within the Philippines. And what we're trying to do now is look at the different ethnic groups within these Negritos. So if you take the second row of maps, the bottom one, all of those dots represents locations where there are tribes of these people who've been documented. And the different tribes have different astronomical systems. Within the tribes shown in yellow, we have postulated there are actually 3 different sub-astronomical systems. We're trying to document those now, and we're trying to show them the ways in which those change through time, particularly as a result of the sea level change for the period 22,000 through to 6,000. And also, as other people moved in later during the period 10,000 to 6,000, you've got these people moving inland, so away from a coastal environment into a hostile forest environment, where again, their ecology is going to change and their astronomical systems have changed. So we look at the present day astronomical system and try and postulate the way in which that would have changed over the last 20,000 years. That's what we're trying to do at the moment with colleagues in the Philippines. One of the other things that we can do is to have a look at the way in which genetics now provides an enormous amount of valuable information, not just for the Philippines and Southeast Asia, but here also in your country, here in Australia. And so I've got here a map showing the very latest documentation on genetics, mitochondrial DNA from all those sampling locations, and we can see a whole range of different tribal groups. And what we're trying to do now is isolate some of those and try and identify which particular ethnic groups are involved and what their astronomical systems are, and look at the relationships between those as we then project those people back in time. One of the interesting things that we've also done is we've done a study of folk tales represented in the book that was published in 1916 and tried to see if there's a basis of truth in most of these folk tales and legends. And of course, we know there is. So one of the things, for example, we've got documentation of beings falling from the sky into rice fields and into other locations. And we can postulate that some of these relate directly to meteorite impacts. So we get back to what Alejandro was talking about, meteorite impacts. And this map on the left is the location of the known meteorites, official meteorites of the Philippines. And we're now trying to correlate those with ethnographic evidence from some of these ancestral tribes that date back